Traditional Logic, Chapter 4, What is Judgment? Introduction. Now we come to judgment. In the last 3 chapters we have been discussing simple apprehension, which is a mental act, and term, which is the verbal expression of simple apprehension. Now we turn our attention to the second part of the study of logic. Just as simple apprehension is a mental act, has a corresponding verbal expression, so also does judgment. Judgment is a mental act whose verbal expression is what we call a proposition. Let us review the chart we studied in the introductory chapter. Mental act, simple apprehension, judgment, deductive inference, verbal expression, term, proposition, syllogism. We see in this chart each mental act and its corresponding verbal expression. For judgment, as we have said, the corresponding verbal expression is proposition. The definition of judgment. Judgment can be defined as the act by which the intellect unites by affirming or separates by denying. What is it that a judgment unites or separates? A judgment, in categorical proposition, unites or separates 2 concepts. When we say, for example, man is an animal, we are joining 2 concepts, the concept man and the concept animal. When we say man is not God, we are separating the concept man from the concept God. The 2 concepts that a judgment unites or separates are called the subject and the predicate. The subject is that about which we are saying something. It is the concept about which we are affirming or denying something. The predicate is what we are saying about the subject. It is what we are affirming or denying about it. The statement, man is an animal, for example, expresses a judgment. In this judgment, the subject is man. It is a concept about which we are going to affirm or deny something. What are we going to affirm or deny about it? In this case, we are affirming that it is an animal. The concept animal is a predicate. The definition of proposition. At its most simple level, as we indicated before, a proposition can be defined as a verbal expression of a judgment. A more proper definition of proposition, however, would be a sentence or statement which expresses truth or falsity. Notice that not all sentences are propositions. Only some sentences are propositions. There are, in fact, many sentences that we use in our everyday language which are not propositions and cannot, therefore, be said to express truth or falsity. Questions, commands, exclamations, and greetings are examples of sentences that are not propositions. When I say, "What is the weather supposed to be like today?" I'm not making any claim that you could say was true or false. If I say, "Go to your room," to my son, I'm not making any truth claims. The same goes for sentences like, "What a nice day," or "Hello." But sentences like, "It is raining today," or "There is a fly in my soup," do express truth or falsity. They are propositions. Elements of the proposition. There are 3 elements of any proposition: the subject term, the predicate term, the copula. In our study, we will refer to these as S, the subject term, P, the predicate term, and C, the copula. The subject term is a verbal expression of the subject of a judgment. The predicate term is a verbal expression of the predicate of a judgment, and the copula is the word in the proposition that connects or relates the subject to the predicate. The copula is some form of the verb to be. The copula is usually expressed by is or are. In the examples of propositions above, the subject term is 1 word, and the predicate term is 1 word, 2 if you count the indefinite article. Man is an animal. But this is not always the case, far from it. In fact, a subject can contain many words, and so can the predicate. For example, we can say, "The little brown-haired boy is very loud." In this sentence, the subject term is not just boy, but the little brown-haired boy. And the predicate term is not just loud, but very loud. The subject term includes not only boy, but all the words that modify boy. The same is true for the predicate. In other words, the subject term S includes everything we are talking about, and the predicate term includes everything we are saying about the subject. The logical form of a sentence. Although later on we will discuss the specifics of how to convert a regular proposition that we might use in our everyday language into a more formal logic sentence, let us simply say for now that any sentence we use in logic has to have a certain form. The form it must have in order to be handled logically is called a proposition's logical form. Let's use a slightly different version of the proposition to which we just made reference to explain what we mean. The little brown-haired boy screams very loudly. If we look at this sentence very carefully, let's ask ourselves, does this sentence have a subject term, a predicate term, and a copula that are easily distinguished? In other words, is it easy to tell what S is, what P is, and what C is? We can easily see that the little brown-haired boy is S, the subject term. But what about screams very loudly? Which part of this is the P, the predicate term, and which is the C, the copula? It is hard to tell, so what do we do? What we need to do is to change the wording of this sentence into a form in which S, P, and C are easy to distinguish. In most propositions that are not yet in logical form, the subject is easily distinguished. It is the predicate and the copula that are in need of reworking. The best way to change such sentences into logical form is to rework the predicate copula portion of the proposition so that it has a form of the to be verb and a relative clause. For example, we can take the proposition, the little brown-haired boy screams very loudly, and change it to, the little brown-haired boy is a child who screams very loudly. Notice that this form of the proposition means exactly the same thing as the original version, but it is much easier to tell S, P, and C apart. S is a little brown-haired boy, P is a child who screams very loudly, and C is. We will cover more extensively the rules for converting ordinary sentences into clearer logical sentences in Traditional Logic, Book 2. Summary. In this chapter, we move from the study of simple apprehension to the study of judgment. We said that judgment is a mental act whose verbal expression is what we call a proposition. We said that judgment can be defined as the act by which the intellect unites by affirming or separates by denying. A proposition is a sentence or statement which expresses truth or falsity. The three elements of any proposition are the subject term, the predicate term, and the copula. Finally, sentences are much more easily handled in logic if they are put into proper logical form, which means that they must show all three elements of a logical proposition clearly.